Welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today, let's talk about the 3 keys. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good night, whenever you happen to be listening to this episode or watching this episode on YouTube. If you're not, please make sure you check it out on YouTube so you get to see the full experience and see all my insane gestures and the repeated gestures that I continually make. And of course, my lovely outfits and how my hair changes at any given moment, as well as some of the other things that change around me as I go through each podcast episode. However, today we are talking about the 3 keys, what I call kind of 3 keys. This gets a little bit into marketing. This gets a little bit into your target audience, who you serve, your clientele, your industry. And the 3 keys are: know your audience, know your worth, and know your time. So know your audience, know your worth, and know your time. Now you may be asking, like, okay, what does that mean? Well, I'm so glad that you asked, because that's what we're going to go over today. I want to start with know your audience. So the reason that these 3 keys are important, this is what will help you determine the validity of your offer, the validity of your service, how effective it is, how appropriate it is for your target audience, for your industry, for your community. Whatever it is, when you think of your customer or your client, you should kind of be thinking through these 3 things and how best to present yourself, your company, and your offer, product, service, whatever, to them. And it starts with knowing your audience, right? You don't really want to open a pizza shop if you are surrounded by a bunch of people that are vegan or, or not Italian. What would be the opposite of Italian? I don't know how well. I guess it might be. How well would an Italian pizza joint work in the sushi district of Tokyo, Japan? Right? It might work because it's a novelty, but generally people go to that area because they want sushi. That's what they want. That's what they're known for. So there's this separation of understanding what that audience in that particular location, mindset, community, demographic, what they want versus what you have to give them. And this comes from knowing them. So you need to know the who. And you may have a product or service that sells to individuals. You may have a product or service that sells to businesses. But in either case, you have an avatar. You have a who that you sell to. You have an ideal client, an ideal customer. And that is represented by all kinds of things. That could be, where they live, what they like to do in their free time, their goals, their financial demographics, their backgrounds, their ethnicity. All those types of things come into play that you need to understand your who. And just beyond that, what are their pain points of that sect of your clientele that you're going after in your audience? What are the pain points that are causing them the most problems? And then recognizing, what do they want the most? Now, there is a difference between what people may need the most based on those pain points versus what they actually want the most. In a totally sane and logical world, those 2 things would be one and the same. What I want the most is what I actually need the most. But if you've been around business, especially dealing with individual customers any length of time, you will find out pretty quickly that those things do not necessarily equal each other. People may absolutely need your life coaching services, but they don't necessarily want it, or what they think they want is something else unrelated, or at least seemingly unrelated entirely, until you need to recognize how your services, what they actually need, will solve what they want, right? And there's levels to this as far as psychology and human nature and all those types of things. But that is your job. That is your job as the leader of your business, of your company, of your department, because this even happens within your department. What do your employees need versus what do they want? Does that make sense? They may need you to ensure that the work is done in order to land that new client so you can pay their paychecks, But what they actually want is a new Nespresso machine in the break room and for you to provide all the Nespresso pods possible because they think that's some luxury, right? Those two things aren't necessarily equivalent to each other. And you need to figure out, okay, well, if I get you the Nespresso machine, what you want, that's going to help me get what our company needs to do the work, to land the client and get the bills paid and make the revenue, right? So that makes sense a little bit. I know it's a little bit different way of thinking about it. But then further beyond that, again, thinking of knowing your audience is what this falls under, who they are, what their pain points are, and the difference between what they need and what they may want most is how do you match with them? How does your company, how does your product, service, et cetera, match to solve that problem, to alleviate that pain point, to fulfill that want in your audience? And you need to be able to answer essentially all, 3 of these questions? Well, I guess 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4, 5. Who they are, what are their pain points, what do they need, what do they want, and how does your product, service match and solve one of those things? Ideally, what they want, but also, well, really ideally, on the surface, it solves and matches against what they want, but in reality solves and figures out what they need and gets rid of that pain point altogether. So that's your first key, is knowing your audience. The second one, as we move down this list, because I would argue knowing your audience is the number one. If you don't get this figured out, nothing else is going to matter because you're going to constantly be putting your offer, no matter how good it is, no matter how efficient it is or how valuable it is. You can't sell hot dogs to people that are vegetarians or vegans. Like, it just doesn't work. No matter how amazing your kielbasa is, vegetarians aren't going to buy it because it goes against whatever values or insanity causes them to be vegetarians. Does that make sense? Or even health issues. It just doesn't work. So you need to know your audience. That's number one. And as you move down this into the next level is know your worth. Now, you may be easily thinking like, oh, like I'm worth $1 million. You know, you may assign a financial number to this, but it's a little bit more nuanced and deeper than that. And it's in relation to your audience. Does your audience feel your confidence, your excitement in your ability of your product or service, your company, to solve their problem, to solve their pain point, to fix their pain point, to meet their needs and wants? Do they feel that? Do you communicate that? Is your worth and your identity, not necessarily identity, but your confidence such that your customer and your audience actually feels that? Because that implies worth. Because if you don't believe it, if you don't think you are the very best HVAC service company in your community within a 3-county, service zone, and you aren't able to communicate that in both the tangible and kind of the intangible ways to your target audience, i.e. anyone that owns a home with an air conditioner in your 3-county radius, then they don't know your worth because you're not communicating that to them. And you do that primarily with your confidence, with your excitement, and your belief in your own product and service. And then along with that is your process. So again, do you match with them? Is the process, product, service that you have, will it solve their problem? Have you spent the investment in yourself, whether it be education, training, hiring the right people to create this amazing product and service that will actually meet their need in the most efficient, valuable, time-saving, whatever that is that's important to your audience? Will your product is worth so much that it will meet all those needs and they're willing to pay for it? And you have to, again, be able to communicate that with them. So now you've figured out your audience, the who, pain points, needs, wants. Your product is matched to them, right? It'll fit with meeting their needs. Now you've figured out your worth and your ability to communicate your worth to your audience in the form of excitement, confidence, background, education, experience, all those things, and that you have the key, the key to their problem, the thing that will solve their issues. And then the third is know your time. Now you go, okay, know your time. What does that mean? Well, how are you efficient with your time versus being wasteful? How are you respectful not only of your time as the business owner, as the business leader, because you have to be, because there are so many amazing ways that you can waste your time every single day, i.e. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, social media, anything, even LinkedIn. Like there are ways that you just get sucked down the rabbit hole. YouTube, anyone been sucked down a YouTube rabbit hole before? I absolutely have, with watching music videos. I'm like, oh, that's an amazing video. Like, oh, cool. They have this live recording of Aerosmith from 1982. Man, I need to see that, concert that they did in 1982. Like, who cares, man? Like you get sucked down these rabbit hole and I'm no longer efficient with my time. And all that translates back to, if I'm not efficient with my time, I'm not going to be efficient with my audience's time, with my customer's time, with my ideal clientele's time. So knowing your time is really, it's a mix between time management. Like, am I spending my time and resources on the appropriate tasks in order to get the most return on my investment of that time and energy and resources, as well as being respectful of others' time. And this could be as simple as being somewhere when you say you're going to be there. So, going back to the HVAC technician kind of example, you're not much worth as a company if you tell your customer, like, yep, our technician, I know your air conditioner just went out and it's 110 degrees here in Tucson this summer. My technician will be there at 2:00 this afternoon. I'm already booked. I have them out on these, 3 other jobs starting at 6 in the morning or whatever the case may be. And if you're unable to meet that and you're not respectful enough to know your time because you should be experienced enough to be able to kind of see into the future a little bit, like, oh my gosh, my guy's been delayed over here, so there's no way he's going to get to you at 2:00, and you make that call and you present yourself as valuable and respectful of their time to the point that, like, hey, I told you 2:00. We absolutely, had our intention was to make that unforeseen circumstances, this other blah, 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 whatever is happening. And you say, we'll be there at 4:00, or do you want to reschedule for tomorrow? Whatever the case may be. There was a really funny episode, actually, just total side note, on Seinfeld, for those Seinfeld fans, that goes into this aspect of it, the classic with the TV, the cable guy, right? Because especially in the 80s and, when cable was really taking off, 70s and 80s, and cable companies were getting really, really big, and, the classic, well, you can choose either between 8 and noon or 1 and 5, or, whatever the time blocks were. And inevitably, they never even showed up for then. But Seinfeld did this really funny episode between Kramer and the cable guy. And it ended up like Kramer was turning the tables on him and, making the cable guy wait. And at the end, it was this kind of big funny, the cable guy like apologized, like, gosh darn it, if we say we're going to be there, we'll be there, within, say, a 2 hour. And if we're not, we'll give you a call and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, kind of a funny episode for those Seinfeld fans out there. But it all comes back to knowing your time, as in being efficient with it, not only for your sake in the form of how are you spending your resources and investing your time, but also how that is translated and communicated to your customers, especially if it is something that is time dependent in the form of appointments, returns, whatever that is for your business. It has a time component to it, or deadlines of some nature, versus just... And it's even, I guess, would compare, if you had a bakery and somebody walks in and says, hey, I'll have a hot chocolate and a donut, and it takes you 5 minutes to, put together a hot chocolate and a donut. Like, that's probably too much time for that particular instance. Like, people want something a little bit faster. So how can you improve those processes? Does that all make sense? So there are 3 keys that I talked about that I wanted to communicate to you. 1, know your audience. Who, pain points, their needs, their wants, and how your product matches. 2nd, know your worth. Being able to communicate that confidence and experience and excitement to your customer that just does nothing but reinforce your price point and the value that you would provide for them in the form of what process you are offering to them to solve those pain points and needs and wants. And finally, knowing your time, being ultimately respectful of how you're spending your time, whether it be investing in yourself personally or your business, and how that all flows together. And then ultimately how you're being respectful of your client's time and how you treat that and interact and make those interactions. Make sense? So those 3 keys: know your audience, know your worth, know your time. You get those 3 things locked down, man, you are ahead of probably 95 to 98% of all other small businesses, certainly in North America. And I would highly encourage you to really focus on those. If you need help with them, absolutely, please go to kalehouser.com, book a call with me. I'd love to talk to you, and we can talk about what your biggest pain point is as it relates to one of these 3, or really kind of anything else as it relates to business and leadership in general. I would love to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was beneficial to you and kind of gets your mind moving and grooving and into that problem-solving mode of how you can make those improvements. I'll talk to you soon. No matter where you're at in the world, have a fantastic afternoon. Bye.